What you need to do is talk to somebody that understands it all, that
Right.
can look at look at and understand what's going on in your home, and then help you decide, as I say, the aspirational approach of what would be possible, and then back down as necessary, and you get the best possible result.
Welcome to Home Green Homes Podcast. I am Izumi Tanaka, a green home advisor and a green realtor. Here I invite a variety of experts in the world of green homes and have conversations about how we can all live in healthy, resilient, and efficient homes. My guests provide insight in a wide range of topics, from designing, building, and living in green homes, purchasing or financing green homes and improvements, to how we can live to reduce the negative environmental impact from the way we live. My goal is to inspire and inform you about how we can make a difference in our own lives and our environment. Hello, this is Izumi Tanaka with Home Green Homes. Today, I have an exciting guest, Jay Gentry, who can tell us all about Passivhaus. So Jay, thank you so much for being with me today. And I understand you have some slide deck prepared for us. So you can go ahead and start sharing your deck and tell us about you.
That sounds great. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Now, can you see my screen now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Let me get it up. Let me have it come up as a full screen.
There you go.
And the title that I chose for today's conversation, I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to spread the word, is the building blocks of Passivhaus and how that performance happens. And by way of introduction, I went to school at UCLA, graduated from UCLA Business School. I'm a leading edge baby boomer, so it was during the Vietnam War, and I didn't get to pick whether or not I went into the military, but I got to pick which branch. So I was a pilot and instructor pilot in the Air Force. I then became a marketing and sales. I went to work in the sales, and shortly thereafter became a marketing and sales consultant, and I've been doing that my whole working life. I am on the board of Passivhaus, California, the board of directors. And I'm semi-retired, although my wife refers to it as hardly retired, because I do spend a lot of time advocating for Passivhaus and essentially just the state of the science, design, and construction. And I would tell everybody, my contact information will be at the end of this. If someone has a question or wants to talk to me, this is what I do. So thank you very much for the opportunity. And we have a lot to cover, so I'll just keep rolling along, but interrupt at any time that you want.
Yes, thank you so much.
We have about a presentation of about 20 minutes. Oh, I've got my wrong deal up there already. It's 20 minutes with 10 minutes afterwards. So we're going to cover varying topics. And my hope is that during this podcast, the people listening will experience some, well, okay, that's interesting. I think that makes sense. I'm going to look further into it, or I'm going to integrate this into my thinking and planning. So that's my goal. The things we're going to cover today the first things are just what are the basics of Passivhaus. So I'll start by saying Passivhaus has arrived. It's a German standard, but it is now sweeping across. You see the hockey stick graph at the top. It's really growing very fast for a number of reasons. And I'd like to point out that in 2017, the United Nations identified and endorsed Passivhaus as a global standard for the developing world and the developed world for new and other buildings as they're being built. A Passivhaus, the description must be a house. So this is actually a passive house, but the word HAUS in German refers to building. So a Passivhaus can also be a multifamily building, or all 5 of these photographs are university buildings, from tall dorms to cafeteria centers to classrooms to things like that. You can really build any building as a Passivhaus, or this I like to show because this is a whole city block that's going to have 750,000 square feet of mixed use, 655 affordable units, and commercial space in a school. And this building this whole city block will actually operate on less than half of the energy that it would require for operations if it were not passive house, if it were just built according to code. And this is just from about a month ago. This is that project underway. So the building blocks of passive house, which is an easy way to understand it, is that the first thing is an airtight building envelope. It's like the thermos that many of you probably have to keep your coffee hot or cool, or your tea or ice water cool during the day. And this envelope, the airtight envelope, includes the windows and doors. So you need higher performance windows and doors. Climate-specific insulation is the second building block, with the removal of thermal bridges, so that your buildings do not leak either air from the first building block or through conduction within the building. And we'll talk further about that as we get on. Okay. Buildings don't need to breathe, as you've heard, is kind of an old wives' tale. They don't need to breathe air. They do need to allow moisture to escape, or humidity to escape, or to keep it in balance. But the air tightness is not necessary. But you do need fresh air for people to breathe. So the third building block with passive house is a balanced ventilation system with heat recovery, so that the other air you're bringing in is close to the temperature of the air inside already, regardless of the outside air temperature. And you can filter that air as appropriate. In the last couple of years, because of the smoke from wildfires, we've been doing a lot of double filtration systems where you can filter it normally for normal, but if the pollen is particularly bad, or there's smoke from wildfires or the pollution or something, you can switch over to a HEPA level filter and get the filter. Because it's airtight, you have control of the air in the building. So that's a big factor that's leading to the new traction. And then, of course, you would put renewables on to get to net zero, or all the way to net zero energy, or all the way to net carbon energy. And a passive house will take less than half of the solar panels to provide net zero than a regular house. In fact, looking at it here in California is something that we do. The California Energy Commission came up with the Code Compliance Index a number of years ago. And in 2006, the level of 100 was considered that is a well-performing, or that's how buildings should perform in terms of energy efficiency and comfort and things like that. This is primarily energy efficiency here. In 2016, they lowered it to 65. Our codes got better so that your average built building was at 65, which is 35% better than 100. Then in 2019, with the energy codes, we got down to 50 to 60. And when you put the solar on it, that is required now, you have to have your photovoltaic compliance. You get all the way down. Oops, excuse me, bump something there. You get all the way down to around 20 to 30. And a regular passive house, your basic passive house, is already at 20.
Oh, wow.
If you go to the next level, you can get a higher level of passive house, like LEED has LEED Gold and then Platinum. This would be Passive House Plus and then Premium. With Passive House Plus, you go to net zero automatically. And with Passive House Premium, you go well beyond net zero. So this passive house performance, these building blocks that we're getting, the performance that you get is an 80 to 90% reduction in energy necessary for heating and cooling. It's a bigger deal in Fresno, where it's super hot, or Minnesota, where up in Tahoe, where it's cold. But 80 to 90% of the heating and cooling is there. And to give some kind of put that in context, that's about the same as you changing from an incandescent light to LEDs. Many of you will have done it. But whereas an LED costs considerably more than an incandescent, it does not cost much more to go to passive house. You get around a 70% reduction in total energy use across the country. California, we already have codes that are better than average across the country. So in California, it's more like a 55 to 50, maybe 60% reduction in overall energy use. Big clue here, and this is one of the things really driving it, is because you have it airtight and you have control of the air, you reduce your unwanted infiltration of allergens and pollutants and things like that by as much as 95%. You can, in a passive house, if you look at the sunbeam coming through the window over the kitchen sink, you can almost not see any of the dust motes and things floating around because they aren't there floating around because the air is filtered when it comes in. You have extreme comfort, including audible. They're very quiet in a passive house. Healthy indoor air quality, durability. They last longer because there's not as air passes through the cracks and things in a regular house. That air, if it has moisture in it and passes through the dew point as it goes in or out, you wind up depositing that moisture in the walls, and you get the deterioration in the mold, etc. And if you do choose to go with passive house, it accelerates or magnifies the impact of renewals or storage. You can get by with half the renewals, as I said earlier, and your storage lasts twice as long. So if you're taking the objective of having having some battery power and solar panels, you can run the solar panels during the day to charge up the battery, and then the battery can run your home at night when the time of use rates are higher. So it just makes a great deal of sense to go in that direction.
Now, I have a question for this last slide. So all this percentage reduction that you mentioned, is it at the lowest level of passive house qualification? Or do you have to go all the way to the higher level of passive?
This is a standard passive house classic is what you achieve.
Wow.
With it. You go even further with the others. Thanks for asking. That's good. I should have pointed that out. That's a good thing.
Thank you.
Now, passive house, it's in the name. Passive house is passive. It means things that you do with the siding or the things that you do that they just perform. And an example of that, people talk about passive solar. An example here is if you site your home properly or building properly and get the eaves correct, you can block the summer sun from getting in and the solar heat gain, and let the winter sun in. You'll find if you look at cave dwellers, the majority of caves, if it's possible, face to the south in the northern hemisphere and the north and the southern hemisphere to do just this, so that all year long your cave is not as hot in the hot summer and not as cold in winter. Plus, you have better light in the winter. Another way of looking at it here, just another example. This is summer solstice at 3 in the afternoon, and you see that the sun is not going into and warming inside the house, whereas 3 p.m. at winter solstice, you have all of this sunlight coming through, warming the floor and making the house better. So in terms of, again, passive, it's in the name that I said. A passive system is something like the thermos, whereas an active system is the pot sitting on the burner. Both give you access to hot coffee all day, and with the burner you also get the smell of burning coffee when it gets down to the bottom, as we've all experienced if we've done it. So as I said, it's in the name. A passive solution is a solution that delivers desired performance just as a function of the way it's designed. Your seat belts in your car don't do anything other than be there, but when they're needed, they're there and they work. So, and it continues to deliver that performance with little or no intervention. I have two examples that I like to use. The first being the wing on a race car. What that wing does, and there's actually one under the front as well, is it's like an airplane wing upside down, and so instead of providing lift like it would for an airplane, it pushes the car down at speed. So when you go around corners, you have much better traction. And because it's just pressing down, you could get it to press down if you put a bunch of lead weights in the back of it, but then those weights would have the centrifugal force to pull you off. It doesn't allow you to turn better. It does make it heavier, but by making it press down, you get that. And as long as you drive the race car, as long as it has the wing on it, it's going to corner better. The second example I like to use is reverse diagonal parking. Some of you may have seen that. I saw it my first time up at Stanford. That's what they use in their, where you go to walk on the trails and things around the different places. They have this reverse diagonal parking where you go forward and back in. Now, the reason that they do that is because it dramatically reduces personal injuries in the parking lot. Because when you back in, the bike is on the back of the car, the picnic basket is in the trunk, and as you see the doors when they open, they just send you to the back of the car. So it dramatically reduces the number of personal injuries. Now it keeps, and the fender benders are similar, But you also, because you're not backing out into traffic, you can see, you know where you're going. You're much less likely to pull out in front of somebody that's driving by. So it's much better. The other thing, and the other reason, it's a passive solution, by the way. As long as the lines are there, you're going to park that way. The other thing that I point out about it that is really important is it does not cost any more to paint the lines reverse diagonal than diagonal. It's a change in the priority. And very many of the things associated with Passivhaus are no different. It's just you did them because of the priority, like the eave on the house. It didn't cost more to do it. You just did it correctly because you knew what you wanted. Right. So moving on to Passivhaus performance, and we already talked about the performances there, and we went through these earlier. I wanted to do them again. But when you're thinking, how does a Passivhaus perform? Think in terms of the inside and the outside. In this case, it's a fireman on the inside of his personal protective equipment, or her personal protective equipment. We can't really tell. And that's what that protects them from the heat and the smoke and the stuff that's going on during a fire. It's true at the other end of the spectrum of an astronaut who is in outer space with no oxygen and extreme cold that's going on. And so what do you do to protect yourself in this? So personal protective equipment or envelope is an airtight shell. Those are both airtight. They are also insulated, because you could make it airtight with saran wrap, but it wouldn't work well in a fire or in outer space. So you need the insulation to protect the heat from heat moving in or cold moving in, or heat moving out to the cold. And then you get continuous fresh air. Interestingly, those are the basics of Passivhaus. The first is an airtight building shell. With a building, you determine exactly where all of the, where is your air barrier? How are you going to stop that? And remember, it includes windows and doors. This is just a small house, but just so that you can, I beg your pardon. The second thing is better insulation correctly applied. And that also includes the elimination of thermal bridges, which we'll talk about in a moment. You see the wood insulation that's here is a very good insulator, because it's wood. It's made from waste sawdust from the lumber industry. And if you let it rot or burn it, all of the carbon that is sequestered goes up into the atmosphere. When you use it for insulation, it locks that carbon in sequestration for decades. So better insulation correctly applied. And that works also for big buildings, the same thing, the climate specific insulation with thermal bridge free connection. And when thermal bridge is like if you've got an iron frying pan, not to grab the handle when you're cooking in it, because even though the handle is not over the fire, the heat comes up through and it bridges to that handle, and you can burn yourself with it. I like to show this example of a larger building. That the building itself, you can see, but this is a thermal camera that's being used. You can see that the building itself is very, very good in terms of of keeping the heat in, but they neglected to eliminate the thermal bridge from the structure that holds the decks up. So what they've really created is a radiator for the neighborhood. And like the toilet leak, that doesn't seem like a big deal, but when it goes on for months, for 24 hours a day, months, it can be a big deal. And here, the thermal bridging is a big deal there. So that's one of the ways we get to the really high level of efficiency. And the third element is this mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. You can see here that the air is going out of the hot room, the wet rooms, the warm air from inside, the red deal, and then it goes through this heat exchanger. And by the time it goes out, it's cool. And that heat is transferred to the cool air coming in so that it comes in preheated. And I have a couple of slides that show that. Basically, we extract air from the kitchen, bath, laundry room, the wet rooms, exhausted outside, same picture as we had before. Intake coming in the same way as you have it before. Because you control it, the air does not mix. You can filter it to whatever level you want it filtered, or even multiple levels, as I described earlier. And to give you some idea, back up. Sorry, I keep touching things with my finger as I'm running. To give you some idea, I put the little lightning bolt there to give you some idea. On a 2,000 square foot home, you can, the equivalent energy used by this heat recovery ventilation system is somewhere in the neighborhood of a 60-watt bulb. It's a very small amount of wattage. It's just turning the fan slowly to move the air, and the air itself changes temperature. So for example, if it's a 90% efficient and it's 70 degrees inside and 30 degrees outside, by the time the outside air gets in, it comes in at about 66 degrees, and it goes out, of course, at 34 degrees. And the way that happens is, if you can imagine a long tube, let's say a 4-inch tube, it's a copper tube, and there's a very thin barrier in between it so that the air never mixes. But as the warm air flows out and the cold air flows in, as the warm air flows out, you wind up with a 70-degree air cooling off and the 30-degree air warming up as they go by one another. So it comes in at that 66 degrees. So
That's the word exchange, right? That's where there's exchange happening.
That's the exchange. And I show it as a long straight pipe, but if you did it as a coiled pipe where the whole pipe is inside the house, but the air starts at the back, then the whole pipe will be that temperature, and you can get it even closer to the high percentage. Also, would like to say that Passivhaus is scalable. We already talked about the giant buildings, but you can do an ADU to a Passivhaus standard, or a small home. This is a 1,600 square foot, was the first Passivhaus on the central coast of California. A contractor that I work with built it. That doesn't even have a heating system because we're on the ocean, so the temperature never goes up or down. It has essentially the equivalent of a hairdryer coil in the heat recovery system, so you can run that for a few minutes each morning to get the temperature where you want it. And of course, you can build, I mentioned already, the bigger building. With an individual home, if you wanted to protect the single family inside, imagine it being an egg, you'd have to protect the whole egg. Then if you wanted to do a bunch of them, you could just do that. But you'd have this little bit of extra cost on each one of them. If, however, you to pack it like eggs in a carton, you get that safety without having to do all of the extra things. So with a multifamily building or a larger building, you only have to air seal the six outside walls. And so the much smaller systems that are necessary to run it make it give it to cost parity or even less expensive. It does not need to cost more. The next thing that I want to, the next thing is just the growing interest in traction. The California Public Utilities Commission last year, they funded a study called MZCAP, which is the Multifamily Zero Carbon Action Plan. This is now back to them, and they have not published it yet. They're doing the final drafting on it, but it will be published. And this has to do with what do we need to do between now and 2035. So what they're saying, the MZCAP desired outcomes, the first one is integrate Passivhaus techniques so we get the higher energy efficiency, enable 100% renewable energy, and do those things. The second outcome is to get that into code, support and drive future code cycles that include Passivhaus and other performance-based approaches instead of the typical checklist kind of approaches that we have with some of the other programs that we have. And then I'll point out here that the third and fourth bullets are both about resilience. And resilience is how your home or building behaves when you lose power during a power outage or heat and cool or something like that. And the next slide is very powerful in my view. This is back to the fireman and the astronaut. If it's extremely heat or cold, you need a thermal enclosure or robust enclosure. For wildfires, you want a fire-hardened enclosure. Passive houses are much more difficult to catch on fire than non-passive houses, again, because of the air that is going in and out. In wildfires, there are great pressure changes as the fire consumes the oxygen in the air, and so you're sucking air out of houses, and it goes back in when it comes back, and some of that air that goes back in is 5,000 degrees or up to 5,000 degrees, and so you wind up with a lot of fires and wildfires start from the inside because the windows get blown out by the pressure. Passive house windows are much more robust to get out. They're still, if they had been in paradise, passive homes would have burned in paradise, but they are far more resistant. Smoke and air, the airtight enclosure with your fresh filtered ventilation system that we've talked about, and for power outages, how long it lasts. A high performance enclosure is the number one priority for resilience, and air sealing is the number one priority for that enclosure. I have a little graphic that I show here. Thinking of resilience as like an airplane. How long, it loses power at 3,000 or 20,000 feet. How long can it glide? Well, like a Cessna 172, a small plane can probably glide about 20 miles to find a place to land. An airliner is much better. It can go about 45, but a glider goes more than 200 miles. Comparing that to a home, you're 70 degrees in the home, but 0 degrees outside, and you lose power. It only takes a 1950 home 8 hours to get down to 40 degrees. A 1980s home, we got better. It's now 3 times as long, 24 hours. 2009, 42 hours. Today, it's close to 2 days, maybe even a little over 2 days. A passive house is more than 6 days. So in extreme weather conditions, when you lose power, you have the opportunity, you can make it overnight and only lose 5 degrees, and then it warms up during the day and you get that back. So some underlying realities I'd like to share as well we'll go here. The natural order of sustainability is do passive things first, active things second, and then put your renewables on third. And this is a good graphic for it. If you want to decarbonize, and as you know, the decarbonization movement is big in California, the first thing you need to do is make your building as efficient as possible. Or if you're doing a remodel, figure out what you can do to make it as efficient as possible. Get low embodied carbon used in the building materials, electrify, and then you get the clean energy and you're there. Over the years, we have gone from thinking about sustainability, the Environmental Defense Fund and Greenpeace, to Energy Star, LEED, Build It Green, prescriptive standards, to performance standards like Passivhaus and Living Building, Well and Reset. And then we prove it. Now we're asked to prove it. In New York, for example, all buildings starting in 2025 are going to have an energy budget. And if they exceed that energy budget, they will be fine. So New York's doing a great job of driving it down. The last segment here is on some evidence-based performance ideas. The McLeamy curve is first. This was from Patrick McLeamy of HOK Architecture about 20 years ago. Where you spend money when you build a building, design and build a building, is the bulk of the money is spent, or the highest spent, during the documentation phase. And what HOK figured out is if we do that in the beginning, we wind up with the opportunity, we get everybody involved and we do the function, performance, design, modeling, budgeting. We do it in the beginning, and then we're in, the total cost doesn't change, but we have the ability to control that cost and a very high, just a low cost, the way that you'd want to do it. So you begin with the end in mind, do the detailed modeling, budgeting, et cetera, like that, and it informs you as you go through the process. The same thing is true for a renovation project. If you will start with the aspirational approach of what is possible and then back down as required by time and budget, you wind up with a better result than if you start saying, okay, well, let's get windows first, or we'll do insulation first, as opposed to getting all set up. If you're getting ready to build a home, what we used to do is it was kind of a relay race where you as the client knew what you cared about, your priorities, preferences, and the realities of time and budget. You worked with your architect, came up with a vision, and then you went to a builder. It was a handoff. Much better to get everybody involved in the beginning so that you have all of these people sharing the vision. And what happens is you wind up achieving the vision much better and more easily. There are a number of performance goals and measurement methods that are there. You've heard of them. This is LEED here, Passivhaus, Living Future, Fit Well, Reset Air, Cal Green, all of those are there. The way that I believe they should be applied and the way that we're going to do it going forward is first, we'll start with some foundational elements. The envelope from Passivhaus, Reset Air for air quality, LEED and Cal Green if you're in California. That's what all of our Title 24 is based on, those from an energy standpoint. But then you can look and you can take personal kind of occupant experience from Fitwell, or toxic materials from Living Building Challenge, or water with the well building. And what we can do when we model and budget now, this dotted line here is the digital twin, the simulated performance, and the actual line is the actual performance that you get. So by way of call to action, I'd say now those of you listening know a little more than you did before, and some of you a lot more, I would imagine. I like the Maya Angelou quote that do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. So I'm going to make just a few real quick suggestions here. Stay informed and get involved. Climate change is going to dominate the next several decades. This is going to, learn about it, stay up to date, stay focused on it. If people are doing things like Passivhaus, add your voice in support. Say, yes, we need. Be a YIMBY, not a NIMBY. We have to do we have to do those things. If you yourself are going to do something on your own home, electrify, improve the envelope, get that continuous fresh air, add renewables, do the storage and things that are there. And if you wanted to support Passivhaus California, you can join. You can just sign up for our newsletter. You can be a volunteer. That's where you would find it, or you could contact me at this number. I will. That number is also, my number is also on the next page. So thank you very much for your time and interest.
Thank you, Jay. Oh my God, this is probably the best presentation about Passivhaus I've seen. It really breaks down to the different factors, elements of, and the benefits. And I really appreciate your clear explanation of it. And I was taking notes to ask you some questions, but you already answered most of the questions. But one thing I would like to ask you is, so you talked about new constructions, and some homeowners might be considering of some upgrades of their homes. And you also mentioned the renovation market. I would like to really speak to people who are considering of renovating, whether it's going to be their own home or it's an investor trying to quote unquote flip the property. Where can people go? Where would be the first step? I mean, you already gave us where to go, passivhauscal.org.
Yes, you can go to passivhauscal.org and look them up. If you're thinking about doing something to your house, send an email to info@passivhauscal.org and say, I'm getting ready to do a renovation and I'd like to get as much for my money as I can. I'd like to do the best job I can without spending beyond my budget. And
Right.
if you'll send the info@passivhauscal.org comes to me, and it comes to all of our board members. And literally in the last 3 days, twice I have referred somebody to a Passivhaus consultant, one in LA and one in San Francisco. And the Passivhaus consultant I refer them to will answer their questions and do things generally at no charge, because they're hoping to get hired to do the work. But they do know what they're doing, and they can help you decide what are the most. If you talk to a solar company, they'll want to put as much solar on to handle your current bill. If you talk to a window company, windows are going to be the answer. You're going to have to replace your windows. If you talk to an insulation company, they're going to want to blow in insulation. What you need to do is talk to somebody that understands it all, that can look at and understand what's going on in your home, and then help you decide, as I say, the aspirational approach of what would be possible, and then back down as necessary, and you get the best possible result.
And since you've mentioned the budget, I'd like to ask you, and you have been saying that it doesn't cost any more than typical or traditional upgrade, or even new construction. So is it really comparable in terms of the cost if you were to actually implement all these Passivhaus elements in the new construction or renovation project? How does it compare cost-wise?
Yes. Well, there's multiple factors, but the main picture is, if you start in the beginning and get an architect and a contractor and an MEP involved, so that you're figuring out what you want to do, we have proven, and you have to have people who know how to build it. So it does not need to cost more for a multifamily building. A single family home will probably be the one that I showed, the picture that I showed, the first one in California. I don't think I mentioned it, won the Fine Home Building Magazine's Best New House of the Year award that year. It was a little over 6% more than if we had done the same thing otherwise. Now, over time, of course, that pays back, but it is a little more expensive to do it.
Sure.
For a single family home. And for a multifamily or larger home, it can range from 3% less up to about 8% more. That's kind of where it is. And the real key is getting people who know how to do it. When you, all the people that are putting in the windows and installing and doing the air sealing and things like that, those things, once you know how, it's, the fourth time you've done a recipe, you go faster and you get it right. So there's a learning curve associated with it. And I'll just jump down to one other picture here. Things like, if you design your house with four corners, if it was originally designed here and you said, let's just make it square and we'll decorate the envelope instead of decorate with the envelope, you wind up with a 10% reduction for your passive house. So it's these, if you're smart about it from the beginning, it does not necessarily need to cost more. You can save and not get the granite countertops, maybe not get the Sub-Zero refrigerator and the Wolf range, and make up the difference. The mechanical systems in a passive house are dramatically smaller. In Fresno, if you have a 2,000 square foot home, they probably put in a 4-ton air conditioner. If it was a passive house, you can get by with a 1-ton air conditioner. So it's less expensive, a big difference. Smaller. More importantly, because it runs smoothly, it travels at 20 miles an hour through the time. Whereas with the 4-ton, you've got like the equivalent of a drag racer going between stop signs.
Right.
So it doesn't have to cost more.
Yes. So now let me get back to, what you said about you have to have the people who know how to do this, right? So how, are there many general contractors out there? Do they have to learn the way to build this, passive houses? Is that a difficult process, or how easy is it to find actual contractors that can do this in general?
There are enough contractors around that you can find them, although we are going to have a bottleneck there as people wind up really transitioning quickly to passive house. The thing where the experience doing it, as I mentioned, the fourth time you prepare a recipe, the experience doing it is important. The modeling system that you use to determine how to do it and whether you're going to get to the numbers you need is called Passive House Planning Package, PHPP. And I've got 9 people signed up currently for the next session, the next training session that we have, to teach people, teach architects, engineers, contractors about that. So you'd need someone who can do a PHPP. It does not now, but within a few years, the PHPP will be an alternative to the Title 24 in terms of the energy efficiency stuff. So right now it's a little bit of you have to find somebody who can do that. And there are people who can do that. And that can also be done remotely. If you have an architect that's interested and that architect will work remotely with someone, it can be done. It's generally going to be a little more expensive, however. In the first times, it will get down to where it's just the way we do it, so we won't notice whether it's more expensive or not.
Right.
Well, if you could get your car without anti-lock brakes, seat belts, airbags, and collapsible frames, it would be cheaper. But now we know you don't buy a car without those things. That is where we're headed with the built environment.
Yes, I am very optimistic about where all this movement is taking us to. And obviously, we have a lot of obstacles, but I'm really grateful that we get to have people like you on my podcast so I can spread this idea around and people would learn more about how we can make a difference in the built environment. So thank you so much, Jay. I am very grateful for your time. And why don't you put up your card where you have the contact information again?
I'll put the contact information out momentarily. This, by the way, is the deck of a passive house that was not damaged at all, looking down at the next door neighbor's home.
Oh, wow.
Just given the opportunity to show you one more thing.
Yes.
To show that, I thought that would be worthwhile. There's my contact information.
Thank you so much. So passivehousecal.org is the website that you can find a lot of information.
Yes.
Thank you so much. This was Izumi Tanaka with Home Green Homes Podcast. And thank you, Jay, again. And until next episode.